I was working at Meyer, and I'd probably been there for about 10 years at the time. I'm called over to cover the photo lab. And so I'm just going through these pictures, man, and this family brought in their photos from their vacation at the Grand Tetons in Yellowstone. They're just some of the most beautiful pictures I'd ever seen. And I'm flipping through them, and I come to this picture of a grizzly carrying a fish in its mouth. And it was one of the most beautiful pictures I'd ever seen in my life. I'd never seen anything like that in a photograph before. That just completely stopped time for me. And it was just sort of like everything just kind of faded away. You know, it's like all the noise died down, all the color and light went away, and it was just kind of like this singular focus that I had. For better or for worse, whatever happens, I'm gonna be here by the time I turn 30, no matter what. Music for me was a pretty big passion from a young age. That was like really the first thing that I could ever recall being interested in or passionate about or showing any kind of talent for. I kind of got the passion for music from my dad. My dad was a guitar player and a singer, and that kind of spilled over. He sort of immersed us in really good music from a young age. I got a drum set at the age of 10. My brother got me just a hand-me-down set. And I started just trying to replicate things that I was hearing, and eventually it led to being in sort of organized musical groups in schools. My music teachers were like my biggest heroes. They were definitely a source of stability in my formative years because some things were going on at home that were not necessarily the greatest in terms of interpersonal dynamics. My eyes were originally to audition in terms of pursuing music. I wanted to be like drum set, studio musician for like record companies. The issue that my support system at the time was worrying about employability, so everybody was talking to me about getting a music education degree, and that was the big sort of thing droning in my ear, so I decided to pursue music education. I learned pretty quickly that that was not where I really wanted to be going, and that was kind of where the fork sort of came in my life. The one road that led me to where I wanted to go versus where this road was taking me. If you're a dreamer, you can't listen to people that play it safe. There's a big difference between working a 9 to 5 versus chasing something that might be a little less reliable, even if it might lead you someplace happier, so to speak. And you know, again, I was young. I mean, I was probably, at the time I was making that decision, probably 17 or 18, very impressionable, and looking to my elders about what would be a good idea. And you know, they all kind of worked the 9 to 5 and whatnot, and that was sort of informing my decision in terms of where I was going to take things. There was also a lot of things that were snowballing in my family at the time. My grandfather was a huge role model in my life. He was such a good example setter and, you know, just the all-American World War II Depression-era badass. My grandparents were descending into dementia, and that was really difficult to deal with at the time. To have somebody who was like your hero just completely start to fade away and to slip into paranoia and just being irrational and unreasonable, and you know, it's like he wasn't my grandfather anymore towards the very end. I had some outstanding memories of both of them. My mom, her mental health just completely dropped off in the last few years of her life. She always skewed towards the negative. From the time I was a little kid, I always remember her being like that. And it wasn't like it was all bad. I do have some really good, fun memories of her. Both of her parents were in the process of being demented and dying, and I think that took its toll. She started becoming a big-time alcoholic. I mean, that just grabbed a hold of her. She started just going downhill. I mean, she was drinking daily and drinking excessively. And she was always very volatile and very temperamental and always very extreme, but that just took it to the nth degree. I'd come home and the house would be just completely destroyed, the interior. She would have ransacked it. There were instances of that when I was a kid, but I mean, towards the end, I mean, it was just getting to be like all the time. My dad was just as much a victim of it. You want to talk about domestic violence. I mean, he was just as much a victim of it as we were. He had the parenting gene, so to speak. He was the type that would take us to Cub Scouts and take us to, show up at concerts and, take us with him to do things and whatnot. In a really heated argument, I was about 7 years old. It was the type of argument that my dad was going to have to go stay someplace else. They were having this back and forth and just this heated exchange, and my dad stomped back in the room, threw his case on the bed, and it was dead silence, and he stopped. And he starts backing up with a hurry into the hallway, and I see my mom standing there, and she's got a loaded gun pointed directly at him, face red, baring her teeth. That was an extreme case, but things like that happened towards the end. It was a lot of that, and it eventually culminated with her suicide. She put a gun in her mouth and she blew the back of her head out. That was the culmination of a very unhappy life. I do remember good things about her. Very motherly memories, which when I talk to my siblings, they'll say that they don't. And that was not my experience. About around the time I was hitting the age of like 24, maybe even earlier than that, to be totally honest. I was at that age where everybody was graduating from school, getting stable careers, having kids, getting married, and my life was just going absolutely nowhere. I was just completely treading water in life. I'd gotten, when I was going into college, I'd gotten an after-school job, the type of job that you have in your in-between time. My in-between time turned into 11 and a half years of working a dead-end job, going absolutely nowhere. It had kind of started to hit me, that weight of what am I doing with my life, where am I going, because it just felt like I was marking time. It was just slipping away. And there was a time in my life where I thought I would never get out of that situation. I couldn't make ends meet. I was just, I was living below the poverty line and it sucked. And I was just like, man, I need to do something to get out of this situation. One of the jobs you can always get, no matter what, is you can get a job in healthcare. And nursing was one that was doable for me. It was super competitive to get in. I spent the best years of my life doing nothing. Your 20s are supposed to be the best years of your life. It took me over a year to save up for that trip. At that point, by the time the trip was approaching, I was in nursing school. It was sort of heading towards this point in my life where I was able to shed a really horrible chapter and kind of move forward into something new. I'd never had that kind of response to a photograph before. I never had something tap into that sort of spiritual part of you, something that's otherworldly, something you can't describe. I was gearing up for the boards. I was just studying constantly, just hitting those books. I remember going into the boards, taking the tests, and I came out just pretty sure I just failed this test. My biggest fear was just having to stay where I was or going back to where I was. There was just a certain pocket of my life I wanted to get out of. And I didn't have Wi-Fi, I didn't have anything. I had to go to the public library. And then I brought it up and it was like, you've successfully passed the boards. I had to go outside and I just sat down on the curb and I cried. Then I got a job and it was life-changing. It really was. When May rolled around, I started heading out west. I drove out there. And at first it's like anything else because it's like several hundreds and hundreds of miles of nothing but cornfields. But then you hit South Dakota. And then you look to the south. The landscape starts erupting and it turns into the Badlands. I'd never seen anything like that before. Not in person, at least. It just totally blows your mind. The geometry of it, just stretching as far as you can see. And then you keep heading out west and it gradually turns into these nice rolling hills and plateaus. And then eventually it turns into these beautiful ice-capped mountains. I went in through Yellowstone's eastern entrance. I found the place where I was staying and I got my tent up and I just kind of went out to this clearing and I sat down and it was like, finally, something, you know what I mean? And there's just herds of bison everywhere. So it was completely blowing my mind. It's like looking at liquid jewelry. It's like gazing into a crystal ball or a diamond or a sapphire or something like that. There's just no words for it. And I was there the day I turned 30. I saw Old Faithful erupt the day I turned 30. And I also saw that bear. I was walking along and I see a downed tree and I see like what I think is the base of the tree. I tried to take a picture of it. There's these sort of stripped trees and I look through the trees. It keeps coming. I'm like, okay, that's a bear. Finally, I see the baby pop its head out and I'm like, oh man. Whew. I was really excited, but I was also really terrified. And she turns down the trail like right at me. So I just started backing up really slowly. And I'm just like, oh man, please just go away. Please, just run away. And eventually she got wind of something that she wanted and she took off. She cut across the trail and I did not see her again, thankfully.